Hi there. My name is Bill Ewanciw, and my parents came from the country of Ukraine, from a city called Drahovich, as they settled in this area roughly in 1915. A homestead that was cut out of the bush, and with 10 acres of cleared land, they started farming and raising big gardens and a little bit of grain, and with the cattle, the hogs, and the horses, they made a living.
Well, when your parents came over here, your father first, what possessions might he have brought with him? What were important things that came?
There was very little. They came pretty well with their bare hands, other than the clothes in their bag, and a few personal items. I think they brought next to nothing. Yeah, I remember Dad bringing what they used to call in there a kujuk, and it was sort of a leather fur coat. That's how they kept warm. But other than that, I'm not sure where a hay knife, I remember. And that's where you had to cut the stack so you could feel.
Oh, so he did bring a tool with him.
That possibly, but I'm not sure if that came from Mandera or did come from Ukraine.
And what kind of fur was this coat made of?
It was usually sheep skin.
Yeah. So when you were a boy, well, what was your first childhood memory?
Well, I think my first real childhood memory was we had to clean up the yard in the springtime as soon as the snow was gone.
So Bill, when your father came over here, how did he decide to come to this area?
Well, I think he looked for land that wasn't occupied. So I think he just scouted through the bush until he found a spot that was close to what was in Ukraine and what was in his heart, and he decided that was his homestead.
Do you think he looked at the soil or the water or the trees around there to see what was useful?
Mainly the water. They all knew that the water is very precious, and so you settled beside so you have water for your cattle and such.
And what's near here?
It's the beginning of Ewanciw Creek.
Aha, so they would have used that water at the beginning. So when you were young, do you remember ever getting water from the river to use?
Not from the river at all. This creek was as clear as it could be. There was springs just a mile and a half north, and it was very clear water. We drank it, and cattle drank it.
So the Ewanciw Creek, you got your water from there?
That's right.
Aha.
Later on, they drilled their bored wells by hand.
But when you were young, it was water from the creek.
Well, I remember I had to be about 10 years old when they dug a well.
So somewhere around 1949. What activities were there in the community? Was there any sort of a hall around here at all that might have had concerts?
No, most of that stuff was done at the school. We had our Halloween night where everybody dressed up, and there was the dances, and then there was the big Christmas concert. It was a big event. We at school we probably would start early September, just when you started school, and you start preparing for a Christmas concert, because this was a big thing.
Oh.
And everybody was an actor and everybody performed.
You'd be in plays and you'd
That's right.
have songs.
Plays and music and all kinds of stuff, and caroling. Caroling was a big thing.
And there were dances there also?
Yes, there was a three-piece band used to come from just south of Smoky Lake. They were by the name of Knesh's, father, mother, and a daughter. And they played away, and people came and danced.
And was it for all ages?
It was for all ages.
So
I remember going to a dance maybe 12 years old and coming home at sunrise. So
And who taught you to dance?
I think one of the girls in school probably.
Oh. So the way farming was when you were young, you must have had a lot of responsibilities. And you talked about the chickens and hogs and whatnot. So how was farming different when you were young from how it is today?
Well, simply size. At that time, if a family had 10 hogs and 10 cows and half a dozen horses, they had pretty well all they needed in life. And they were self-sufficient and self-sustained. So you didn't need that much. And any help you needed, you got from the neighbors. Neighbors came and helped you from all sides, be it, trouble calving or whatever it might be, or when the chores were too great, or threshing time. So we needed each other. Where today, the farmers are too much for themselves, and they just get bigger and think they can handle all this stuff. And that's the biggest difference.
Your whole family go to town? If your dad had to do errands, or?
Well, no, just usually the trip was Dad alone and myself, because I still wasn't going to school.
Oh, you were really little.
Yeah, but somebody had to keep running the farm. You know, you were gone for 5 hours of travel, plus had to rest the horses for 4 hours or so
Oh, you did, yeah.
in town. So, you know, there wasn't much time. So somebody had to look after the farm in the meantime.
So you'd go with your dad because you were still under school age.
I was still under school age. And, as soon as I started getting to school age, Dad developed an illness and he was in and out of hospital.
So it took how long to get to town?
2.5 hours.
And so your dad passed the time by...
Humming along and telling a few stories and talking to the horses.
Yeah.
Keep going.
What important moral values did your parents teach you?
Actually, he taught me quite a few that I can really relate. And one, Mom was a churchgoer, and she'd read the Bible a lot, and she said, if you want a good guide to life, the 10 Commandments are probably your best guide. I'm sure nobody can follow them. There was only one person who ever was supposed to have been pure. All the rest are us are different. So that is a guide to life. Lying was sort of prohibited, because if you lie, there's always two sides. There's never only one. So if you lie, you're living with two stories automatic. The best way to get out of that is not do it. So that was another moral that they installed in us. And I suppose the last one is, I remember Dad saying that, you know, only believe what you see. What you hear usually is not too much of a truth. So he said, believe very little of what you hear and a little more of what you see, because even seeing is something deceptive.
So what moral values did you pass on to your children?
I suppose the biggest one is have respect, be it for other humans or be it for the land, and I think that's probably the best thing we can leave with our kids. There's many more that you can, you know, but I think if you teach them respect, I think it teaches them a lot.
So you say when you were a child, the neighbors used to help one another quite a bit?
Oh, the neighbors always helped each other. I remember when Dad was getting too old and Walter moved away, and I was pretty well the only guy that knew something about cattle around here. And I learned a lot from a vet in town, he was sort of a self-taught vet as well. And I used to go around the neighbors helping them pull calves, and anytime they had problems, that was sort of my job, and I liked it, and I sort of still do.
And your father did veterinary work, didn't he?
Yes, he did.
So then when you came back in the 70s, did you find it was similar, where people were helping each other?
Yes, at that time they still were. Yeah, they were still, it started changing probably in the late 70s, where, you know, the modern machinery came out. The combines, the bigger combines used to come down, and people, instead of 1/4 section of land, they had by 2, and you start expanding slowly. And so it started changing about then.
When you were a little kid, you had several siblings. Were there any toys that you had around the house at all, or how did you spend your time?
Not really. We built most of our toys, and you know, the favorite one was when they used to saw wood for the winter as heat. We'd get the sawyer to cut us blocks only about 3 inches thick or so, and some pretty formed poplar. That'd be wheels, and we started building wagons.
Oh.
And winter time we built sleighs and skis, and most of it was built. There was very, very little bought until later on.
Were there any skills or crafts that your parents taught you?
Well, mainly about animals, how to handle animals, how to train horses so to be good for you, do what you needed them to do, be gentle to animals, and you kind of get the same respect back. I think that's probably the two things, and of course the veterinary skills that you learned. We could tell more or less when a cow was sick. We could tell more or less by the symptoms is what she was sick of, and that used to really help a lot.
Did your father teach you to hunt?
No, apparently Dad went hunting very early when he was here, and he chased a moose all day, and then he got lost in the bush, and he never did. But as a kid, that's what we learned to do, is hunt and trap and make extra money for...
Oh, so you did that you learned it on your own?
Yes.
Or maybe even from your
Well,
older
maybe
brothers? Yeah.
Brothers might have taught me quite a bit.
Oh, so you trapped also?
Yes, did, because the furs from the weasels and the squirrels and the muskrats in the springtime would, you know, pay for a pair of skates or whatever.
Were there any skills that you passed on to your children?
I think the skill I passed on to them is how to treat animals, and then there's all the other sides that come with this, but you know, Billy learned to break horses. You know, they learned how to look after animals, I think.